There are nearly 7 billion people on our planet, more than twice as many as there were just 45 years ago. But what if the population of the world doubled again in an instant?
There are shocking reports of chaos and violence at border crossings.
It's a massive migration north. Millions flee the ruins of Mexico City.
There are water riots in Los Angeles for the third straight day. The aqueducts are dry.
Can we find enough room to live? Enough food to eat? Enough air to breathe? Enough water to drink? This is what would happen if the world's population quickly hit 14 billion. The Earth hasn't always been a crowded place. When the pyramids were built, there were less than 30 million people on our planet. "4,000 years later, as London's Big Ben was being built, the world's population reached 1 billion for the first time. Just 80 years later, as Mount Rushmore was carved, the population had doubled to 2 billion. The next doubling took only 45 years, just after the World Trade Center opened in 1973. We keep growing at an astounding speed, adding the population equivalent of 10 New York cities to our world every year. If we keep expanding at this rate, the population will double again in 59 years. But the world is already straining to handle 7 billion. What would happen if the population doubled again right now? In New York, Asia, all over the planet, every single country is overwhelmed. The world is suddenly a very crowded, frustrated planet. All the people on Earth need food, water. They need places to live. Countries will be transformed.
We're celebrating the birth of America's first baby of the new year. The population will top 620 million this year.
Beijing is racing to finish its first 200-story apartment building, more than 800 meters high. 10 more are planned for the coming year.
New York's mayor approves the construction of the city's first super skyscraper.
It's been 6 months since the world's population doubled. All over the world, there's an unprecedented building boom to create homes for the world's 14 billion people. Los Angeles, trapped between the ocean and the hills, builds anywhere it can. The 1¼ square kilometers of Chavez Ravine home to Dodger Stadium, is one of the targets. In Manhattan, there is nowhere to go but up. Architects struggle to find the best, fastest way to handle the population bomb. They begin to design and build the world's largest skyscrapers, more than 200 stories tall. These massive new towers are extremely heavy, up to 1 million tons. The easiest way to support these gargantuan towers is to build on bedrock so they don't sink into the earth. In Manhattan, some of the world's first skyscrapers were built on Wall Street, where the bedrock is so close to the surface. Now, the buildings will soar much higher. While billions wait for new housing, we're fighting claustrophobia. Families crowd together in motels, offices, wherever they can find space. But housing isn't the world's only problem. We're running out of food. Before the population doubled, the world's farms occupied an area equal to that of the entire continent of South America. To feed our doubled population, we need to create vast new farmland, almost twice the size of the United States. Forests are the first target. Thousands of square kilometers are chopped down for new farms, but it will take as much as a year to clear and plant the land. In North Africa, Egypt brings water into the Sahara Desert to create new farmland. Before the population doubled, nations had stockpiled enough corn and wheat to feed the world for 12 weeks. Now, China and India have eaten through their grain reserves. 5 billion people are hungry. It's not just grains. There are more than 240 million dairy cattle in the world. But a female dairy cow isn't milked until it's 24 months old. Milk production falls far behind. The price of food jumps dramatically.
Economists are calling it hyperinflation. The average trip to the grocery store costs $700.
The United States has an advantage over many other countries. Every year, it used to export 72 million tons of grain, including 45 million tons of corn, more than a quarter of what was grown. Now, the country stops all exports.
For the third day in a row, UN delegates attack the Feed America First campaign.
To find more food for this new world, hungry countries turn to the oceans more than ever. Enormous nets capture fish up to 1.5 kilometers deep. In China, the world's largest fishing industry lands 4 million tons of fish every month. The push to feed a hungry population threatens our basic infrastructure. A growing fleet of trucks hauls food 24 hours a day. A third of the highways in the United States were already in need of repair. They can't take around-the-clock pounding.
toll is estimated at over 60, with many more feared trapped inside.
The Department of Transport has announced the closing of thousands of bridges until crews can inspect them all.
It's been just 6 months, and the world is struggling to deal with the massive demands of 14 billion people. For food, for places to live. And the biggest crisis hasn't even hit.
It's the biggest housing crisis of all time. 3 billion people without permanent homes.
More than 100,000 people are now living on the Mall in Washington, in clear view of Capitol Hill. For now, the president refuses to evict them.
200,000 people are squatting in Central Park, on land once valued at $500 billion.
It's been a year since the number of people on Earth doubled. Countries are in crisis. Tent cities spring up everywhere. In New York, new subway trains have been added. They arrive every 2 minutes. The system can't safely handle anymore. Now, almost 500,000 people pass through Times Square station each day. The crush is suffocating. On the streets, buses try to cope with the overload. A single bus keeps 25 cars off the road, but it's not enough. Architects finished designing the first of several new super skyscrapers, 200 stories tall. 10,000 people can live in one city block. Super skyscrapers soar around the world. Some of these enormous buildings have holes near the top to let high winds pass through. But in China, there's a problem.
The 200-story building was built on top of an undiscovered fault line. The weight of the building triggered an earthquake.
Rescue workers pick through the rubble. Officials say there are more than 3,000 dead.
Los Angeles teeters on 6 major fault lines. The fear of earthquakes keeps most buildings below 20 stories, including the new apartments in the Chavez Ravine. As soon as the first building is complete, it's overcrowded. The age of the single-family home is over. Cities are bursting with people. There's a price for all the new construction. It can take over 100 trees to build just one wood-framed house. 5 million homes require a forest the size of Rhode Island. Clear cuts scar the planet. It's not the only natural resource being strained. In New York, The water system is designed to deliver 3.8 billion liters of water every day. Now, twice as many people take baths and flush toilets, doubling the amount of water that gushes through an aging sewer system. Human waste mixes with rainwater. In Manhattan, the sewers used to overflow during heavy storms. Now it happens almost every time it rains. Raw sewage oozes into the rivers and homes. Fresh water used for drinking is becoming polluted. The lack of clean water causes outbreaks of dysentery and diarrhea. Sewage and garbage disposal can't keep up. Rats flourish in these crowded cities. There are more cases of meningitis and complete kidney failure. It's traced to Weil's disease, a deadly sickness spread by rats. In America, overcrowded hospitals are flooded with patients suffering from diseases rarely seen here for a century. Cholera, typhoid fever, all caused by polluted water. Clean water is the biggest problem in this crowded new world. The planet has lots of water. It covers 70% of the Earth. But almost all of it is salt water. Just 3% is fresh water. And most is locked up in glaciers and ice caps. In fact, we survive on just 1% of our world's water.
The City of Los Angeles would like to remind you that strict water rationing has begun. Households are limited to 55 liters a day. Meters will be checked regularly to ensure compliance.
Water, so long taken for granted in the Western world, is precious. Before the population boom, the average household used about 870 liters a day for showering, washing our clothes, and doing the dishes. A third of what Americans used didn't even get to their houses. It went to watering their lawns. But the era of infinite water is over. In London, 12 million people depend on water from the River Thames. So much water is being used that during low tides, enormous ships are grounded.
Between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m., there will be no water.
All through the developed world, it's the same story.
Achtung! Zwischen 14 und 18. L'eau n'est pas disponible cet après-midi. C'est un annonce. Entre orele de 2 și 6.
Farmers are planting new crops that won't need as much water. By changing the genes in corn and wheat, plants can survive with less water from the sky or the ground. These drought-resistant plants are in high demand to feed a hungry world. On land, the worldwide building boom puts enormous pressure on the power system. In North America, 100 new nuclear plants are rushed into production, but they won't all be working for 10 years. The quickest solution is coal. In China, 4 new coal plants begin operation each week. North America follows suit. And to conserve energy, power curfews roll across the world. The bright lights of major cities are turned off at midnight. At 14 billion, the world is struggling to support us. Soon, we'll have to make major sacrifices, but they won't be enough.
Severe water shortages are being felt. Water rationing is going to be increasingly tightened.
China is now desperate for foreign aid. New farms haven't produced the food the country needs.
Washington says that martial law is extended for a 3rd year. Clashes between police and gangs have been reported across the country.
It's been 3 years since the world's population doubled to 14 billion. The world is increasingly dangerous. Hundreds of millions of people are now unemployed, many drifting from city to city looking for work and food. With soaring prices and economic collapse, anger and desperation lead to violence. Homes are broken into as people search for food and water. Law and order break down. With the massive expansion of our power system, pollution is increasingly toxic. In China, 75% of all electricity comes from burning coal. Smoke hides the sun.
It was another dark day in Beijing today. The city was choked with thick smog. China defends its decision to double the number of coal plants to fuel homes and agriculture.
China's desperate move is choking North America too. The smoke and toxins are carried by the jet stream to California. In Los Angeles, smog from Asia joins the pollution from more than 5 million cars. The city is engulfed in thick clouds of pollution. And it's not just North America.
We have a smog warning in effect for the 8th day in a row. The elderly and anyone with respiratory problems are advised to stay indoors.
In London, the effects are deadly. In 1952, as many as 12,000 people died during the Great Smog. This time, it's much worse. Heavy smog lasts for weeks. Tens of thousands of Londoners die. Many of our natural resources are running out.
There are reports of more violence today as water lineups reach 3 hours long. The National Guard is now patrolling public taps to keep the peace.
Los Angeles suffers from a major water crisis. Water is increasingly rationed. Each household gets water for only a few hours a day. Lineups at public taps are common. Los Angeles relies on massive aqueducts. They snake across deserts and hills for hundreds of kilometers, sucking in water from the Colorado River. And LA isn't the only city that Colorado supplies. 25 million people in several states are quickly draining the river dry. Industries are in trouble too. It takes more than 300,000 liters of water to make 1 ton of steel. Construction was the single biggest consumer of steel. The lack of water is stalling the building boom. To find more water, coastal cities like Los Angeles turn to the sea. LA believes desalination plants that turn salt water into fresh water are the only way to provide for its population of 20 million. Farms are the single biggest consumers of water in the world. Like Los Angeles, farmers in the American West rely on the Colorado River for most of their water. Much of it is held in reserve behind the Hoover Dam. But now, the water level is falling. Each year, humans take out billions of liters more than the river can give. The lack of water isn't the only issue farms are facing. To maximize yields, farmers are using more fertilizers and pesticides than ever before. Around the world, entire species of fish have all but disappeared. To replace what we've lost, fish farming has grown faster than ever. Millions of fish are being grown, but it's not nearly enough to feed the world. Hungry populations surge toward countries who have the most food and water.
The White House announced a complete freeze on immigration today, the first in the nation's history. Police are being asked to check for identification in an effort to stop illegal immigrants.
It begins as a trickle, but it will soon be a flood. Countries around the world are desperate. Violence is growing. Food is scarce. And soon, farms will begin to fail completely.
The United Nations say Central Africa is a disaster zone. 30 million so-called water refugees are now on the move.
The new Manhattan apartments will reduce the city's dependence on water, but the construction of other units has fallen far behind.
It's been 7 years since the world's population doubled to 14 billion. New York's tent city is all but gone. Central Park is a forest of mega skyscrapers and construction sites. But the lack of water and power means new buildings are taking years longer to complete. We can't build our way out of this crisis. Life is changing on the streets, too. After years of round-the-clock traffic jams, cars are banned from New York City. Commuters are forced to leave their cars behind and take public transit. The last time Manhattan streets were closed to cars was in the days after 9/11. Now, streets are permanently turned over to pedestrians, bicycles, and buses. Power generation has also changed. To help provide electricity for 620 million people, the United States built dozens of nuclear reactors. Now, some are online. But such a massive change creates just 25% more power. To make up the difference, states take advantage of what nature provides for free. Hundreds of square kilometers of the Arizona desert are covered in solar panels. Other countries harness the wind. But it takes 10,000 turbines to supply power for every 10 million households. And there are days when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. Most of this new power goes to cities. In smoggy LA, this apartment building is home to 2,000 people. They use half as much electricity as families who live in houses. In a world of more than 14 billion people, cities are the best solution. But in LA, water continues to be its biggest single problem. Los Angeles has opened a dozen desalination plants. But the energy they need to operate drives up the price of water. Even shipping water is expensive. Water is heavier than oil, and it must be treated before humans can drink it. The water crisis is being deeply felt in the countryside as well. Farms in the Midwest rely on a vast subterranean lake known as the Ogallala Aquifer. It's the size of California. The water is pumped out from underground. This water has been collecting for millions of years as rainwater seeps into the ground. But now, after just 7 years with twice the population, the pumps that pull the water in from the Ogallala are running dry. Some of the new crops that were meant to feed a starving world are failing as the water levels fall. Irrigation accounts for nearly 2/3 of the world's water use. Now, major aquifers all over the world are shrinking. Many cities rely on aquifers too. Mexico City now has 36 million people. Crowded and overheated, the population gets its water from a massive aquifer directly beneath the city. And the pipes that pull the water up from the aquifer are leaking. Buildings are crumbling as foundations erode.
Mexico City's largest cathedral collapsed today, ruined as the ground beneath it caved in. As many as 200 people are feared trapped inside.
It's no longer safe to stay. Mexico City begins to empty out. And it's not alone. Countries around the world are becoming impossible to live in. Too polluted, too dry. It sparks a migration unlike any the world has ever seen.
It's the worst humanitarian crisis in history. So-called water refugees are... Millions of people are on the move. Borders around the world are jammed with the desperate and the starving. Water is their single biggest demand.
It has been 10 years since the world's population doubled. Hundreds of millions of people are leaving their homes. Along the coast of Los Angeles, many desalination plants lie abandoned. Once a city of 20 million, water shortages shut businesses down. The apartment buildings built after the population doubled are abandoned. The California dream has run dry. It relied on water stored in vast reservoirs on the Colorado River. Now they're almost empty, drained by too much farming and too many thirsty cities. Farms, once the hope for the world, have run out of water. Farmers have no choice but to leave. They join a growing exodus north. The destination? Wherever there's water and hope. But it's a dangerous journey. Stopping for water is risky. Ponds and streams are full of pesticides and fertilizers from farmers' fields.
Reports from around the country find water is selling for as much as $7.50 a liter. The Department of Agriculture also says that aquifer levels are at an all-time low.
Everywhere, water is more valuable than oil. Each of us needs about 2 liters a day to survive. If we get less than this for more than a day or two, our bodies start to dehydrate. We stop urinating, stop sweating. The mind gets confused and disoriented. If we don't get water soon, we'll die. More and more of the world's water is polluted. Streams carry chemicals to the Mississippi River and from here to the Gulf of Mexico. The fertilizer causes algae blooms on the surface that cover hundreds of square kilometers. As the algae dies, it sucks oxygen out of the water. The result is a floating desert. The fish can't breathe here. Plants can't grow. A cycle of pollution, contamination, and death is spreading across the planet. Desperate farming practices have ruined the land. In Africa, the Sahara is edging south. billions of tons of sand force 100 million people to leave. In North America, water refugees head for the world's largest surface reservoir of fresh water, the Great Lakes. They were formed by the end of the last ice age, 12,000 years ago, their water left over as the glaciers melted. Now, millions of people are heading for its shores. Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto are bursting at the seams. There are other sources of fresh water. Two-thirds of the world's fresh water is locked up in polar and glacial ice. At the North Pole, nations use dynamite to blast pieces of ice loose. They're towed to coastal cities, including San Francisco and New York. But the millions who have fled the dry south for the Great Lakes are facing harsh conditions. Vast tent cities and shanty towns grow outside of urban centers like Chicago and Toronto. Doubling the world's population has led to the biggest migration in the history of the planet. The biggest collapse is about to follow.
The world census is shocking. In China, now just over 700 million people, a far cry from the 2 billion it reached 35 years ago.
In Africa, it's the first year where the population hasn't fallen since the so-called Great Hunger, the decade when 1 billion people died.
The United States announced today that the population was just over 150 million, from the all-time high of more than 600 million.
It is now 35 years since Earth's population doubled. Near large bodies of water, cities have mushroomed in size, reaching 35 million people in forests of mega skyscrapers. At night, these megacities shine, but the rest of North America is almost completely dark. Once thriving cities have been abandoned. Throughout England, France, the United States, if they're not close to water, economies have collapsed. In much of the Midwest, farms have been abandoned for lack of water. These farms relied on irrigation from the Ogallala Aquifer. 35 years of trying to feed a doubled population sucked away much of the water. Snow and rain slowly replenished the aquifer. But it will take years to replace the water humans took out. Billions have died hungry, finally confronted by the reality of what the Earth can sustain. After 35 years of decline, Earth's population has finally stabilized. It's dropped to 4 billion. Now, the Earth's comeback begins. In the oceans, the fish stocks that we all but wiped out slowly rebuild. Forests start to take back land they occupied before settlers arrived. For the first time in decades, rivers in many countries flow freely, no longer dammed and drained by cities and massive irrigation. The reservoirs on the Colorado River begin to fill up again. This has been a thought experiment, a look into a bleak, suddenly overcrowded world. But already, millions are starving. Many cities are overcrowded. Poverty is growing. In the coming years, these strains are likely to get worse. Some believe that the Earth is already at the limit of what it can support, and our population continues to grow.